What up, Bars Nation? Welcome back to a special episode of the Dropping Bars podcast. This is a special Valentine's Day episode. And today on the podcast, I have my dear friend, my sister with me, Alicia Bubb. You know what? Let me put some respect on her name. Dr. Alicia Bubb. Alicia, welcome to Dropping Bars.
Hey, hi, Kimron. Thank you for having me.
And, Alicia and I, we studied together. We did our undergraduate studies together in Mexico. We both did our bachelor's degree in economics. And since then, I've gone astray into the world of digital media. And Alicia continues steadfast in the world of economics, completing her master's and PhD in economics. So before we jump into what I want to talk about, why Alicia, you recently graduated with your PhD. Tell me about that. What was that experience like, completing a PhD out there in Australia?
Oh, all I can say is that it's a very unique experience. It's very difficult, not in terms of what's required technically necessarily, because at least that technical knowledge is there, and you can use it to solve problems. It's more of a mental hurdle that you have to overcome. It requires some serious perseverance, working through problems that seem like they can never be solved. But I would say coming to the end of it, it's worth it.
Yeah, wow. I may complete a PhD one day. Who knows? But all for now,
You
I'm
can.
chilling for now. So, but you know what? But congratulations. This is huge.
Thank you.
Very proud of you. And part of your research, part of your studies, part of your thesis is what we are going to be discussing here today. Now,
hmm
we know today at the time of recording this episode, it's not Valentine's Day yet, but by the time this episode will be released, it will be Valentine's Day. And
hmm
on Valentine's Day, that's when we tend to spoil our partners, our loved ones. We take our husbands or our wives out for dinner. We buy them special gifts. And it's that time when people show. I mean, we should be showing love every day, but it's that special day when people show love for each other. You show love to your partner, your wives, your husbands, whatever it is. However, I every Valentine's Day there is this song. It's on Facebook. I see it all the time. People make videos and it says Valentine is
Time is
coming.
coming.
Where is your
Where's your
boyfriend?
boyfriend?
You are sitting at home, lonely.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's weird. Every time I see that video pops up in my newsfeed on social media, I laugh. But I don't laugh because people are lonely or single or whatever. I just think it's funny. However, it turns out based on Alicia's study that there is a cost to being single. There's a tax on being single. And that's exactly what we are going to be talking about today. So if you are experiencing Valentine's Day today alone, single, there's actually a cost. Uh, I don't know much about this. So Alicia will tell me if what I'm saying is making sense, or she will make more sense of it for now, for us. So the first thing I want to ask you, Alicia, as we jump right in, is singledom or is singleness on the rise?
Yes. So first of all, let me just define what I mean by single or singledom, right? So we're speaking about people who are not in a long-term relationship, right? So that can be they've never been married, or they've divorced, or they're widowed, right? So basically, being single can happen anywhere along a person's lifetime or life
Mhm.
cycle, right? Now, we see that yes, singledom is on the rise, and it's not only in developed countries, but it's also happening in developing countries, right? So, demographers, they've identified some phenomenon um, as a means of explaining why this is happening. So there's something that we call demographic transitions.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the first demographic transition, which is basically when industrialization and urbanization happened and people started shifting towards the urban areas for work and so on. So you had a drop in mortality rates, and
Mm-hmm.
you also had larger, more extended families rather than smaller families, right?
Okay.
So jobs basically started to replace the need for um, having a partner economically, because
Oh.
yeah, so women, marriage for women back then, it was more for the purpose of being stable, economically stable, as a means to survive, you know.
Right.
And you had some financial systems that arose out of that that are still around today that are a bit, I would say, outdated, right? What we're experiencing right now is called a second demographic transition. And this is the main driver for why people are staying single for longer periods. So you have a rise in women prioritizing their careers and personal growth and education, right?
Okay.
And as a result, they gain a lot of financial independence. So as a result, marriage is more of a choice rather than an economic necessity.
And
So,
I
mhm,
imagine you say marriage, but I imagine it also factors in like long term common law relationships too, right?
exactly, exactly.
Right.
So also what happened during this time, or what is happening, is that there's a societal acceptance for cohabitation or casual relationships, or even
Mm.
for people being single long term. It's becoming more socially acceptable, and as a result, people are delaying marriage. They're dating more. They even some people are even choosing to stay single for life, right? And in developed countries, right, on I think here in Asia Pacific, I think 1 in 10 people are going to be single by 2040. In Australia, it's close to 28%, which is very high. I
Mm-hmm.
think right now in some Nordic countries, it's around 44% of
Wow.
people that live in single households, right? And in developing countries, as they're becoming more urbanized, you're seeing a lot of delayed marriages, especially for women who are educated, right? Even though in some countries there's an expectation for marriage. So some countries they still have very low singledom rates. For example, China and India, right? But as a whole, as a society, I'm talking about global. That's what the trend is. So Valentine's Day to get a reality check, like it isn't just for couples anymore, right? I'm sure you remember when we were in Mexico, there was this thing about it's a Dia de Amor y Amistad, so it's
Yes.
love and friendship,
And
right?
friendship.
So
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So
Oh. Mhm.
go ahead.
No, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was saying that what's happening now is that now that there's more single people and social norms are changing, right? We can't keep on ignoring that single people exist, because the reality is that a lot of the structures that are in place in the economic system is built around families, right? When I say that, for example, in a lot of the a lot of the developed world, you still have that family focus in the welfare system, where people with children or people in couples, they get marginally more benefits than somebody who is single. In the States, that's actually an issue with some of their programs, that single people are actually being taxed into poverty because of their status, because they don't qualify for certain benefits, right?
Yeah, and I think
But
the same
mhm,
thing happens here in Canada as well. Like families get more benefits if you have
mhm,
if you have a child, you can get more tax returns, and so.
mhm, mhm. So outside of the actual tax system, when we speak about a singles tax, we're talking about that additional cost or disadvantage that a single person would face just for existing, just for being single, right? And you have to remember that some people, they don't necessarily choose to be single. Sometimes it's just a circumstance, you
So
know?
so then in that case then tell me then in what ways does being single cost more? Because you just mentioned the single tax. So
Hmm.
in what ways does you or me be I mean I'm not single, you're not single, but
Hmm.
for someone who's watching that, they're sitting down Valentine Day on the couch, eating an ice cream, watching a movie, and thinking, in what way does being single cost more?
Yeah. So singles tax is not an official tax, right? It's just that additional money that singles have to pay or they have to spend because they don't have that opportunity to split it with a partner. And
Mm,
what's an obvious cost? We're talking more about fixed cost, just fixed
mhm,
cost of living. So think about things like rent or the fixed component of your groceries, for example,
mhm,
right? Those are some very classic examples, right? So imagine you have to rent a one bedroom apartment. Let's say it costs, I don't know, here it costs maybe about $2,000 a month, right?
mhm. Right,
If it's just you, right, that $2,000 a month is probably like 50% of your monthly income. But if you have to split it with a couple can share a single bedroom, a one bedroom apartment. If you split that cost with your partner, even if you don't split it 50-50, let's say you split it 70-30, it still costs less per person than if you were to go at it on your own,
right.
right? Hmm. So that's just one very classic example, right?
Yeah.
Now think about.
Well, that
Mhm,
does make sense.
mhm, mhm.
And so, sorry, you were going to add something else?
Yeah, I was going to add
Okay.
other things that we kind of take for granted, right? So, for example, if you go to Costco,
Mm,
it makes sense to buy in bulk,
in
right?
bulk.
Okay,
Yeah.
you'll buy the meat in bulk, the eggs in bulk, and so on. But when you're a single person, if you buy it in bulk, there's a high risk that a large portion of it would go bad, right? So
Yeah,
you
that makes
can't really
sense.
take advantage of those cost savings that you would
Oh,
get, right?
that I never thought about that. That makes
Or
so much sense.
yeah, even your utility bills or your subscription services, right? So your electricity, your internet, your water, right? These bills, some of these bills, they do have a variable component where,
Mhm.
according to usage, but there's also a fixed part of it. So your bill is usually always a certain minimum. If you have to split that with someone else, it's a less cost per person. And you might think that it's small, like these are small costs. So maybe, okay, it might be like 150, $200 per month. But think about what happens over the life cycle of a person,
Yeah.
right? Over many years, like those are costs that you could have saved, even if you do a simple reinvestment strategy, right? Over 30 years, for example, it makes a big difference over the life cycle of a person, you know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And are there are there like specials? I mean, you mentioned some of it like when you began, but like, are there like
Mhm.
special systems that leads to this?
Yeah. So as I said before, like many systems, they are kind of focused around families. So the tax and transfer systems, especially in developed countries, they're geared towards families. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. Obviously, when the policy was enacted, there's a certain rationale behind it. The government might have certain objectives when they're making
Hmm.
this type of a family policy. But what I'm saying is that we can't ignore the fact that people are choosing to be single more and more.
Right.
So,
It's
like,
the whole. I don't need a man. I got money. I got a job.
I mean, I try not to get into the like
The
those
politics
aspects
of
of
it.
it, yeah, exactly, right, because of course there's some psychological aspects to it,
Yeah, yeah.
why people make that choice. But you also see the single stacks in the private sector, I would say. So,
Mhm.
for example, when you're traveling, if you're traveling alone, and you have to book a room, there's something called a single supplement that these hotels and so on charge you. So basically, what they're saying is that when we designed our room and our pricing, um, we designed it in such a way that we expect couples or at least two people to stay into a room, in a room,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
Now, if you're the only one enjoying that room, you have to pay for that privilege, right?
So
And
that's
you,
actually a thing.
yeah, it's called a single supplement. You can look it up, right? And not only that, right? There's if you're the only one that's going on a, let's say, a tour or a flight or something, right? There's sort of a potential loss of revenue that these
Mhm.
services, that these companies would have to absorb if they just gave you a single fee. What do I mean? If you went on, let's say, to Disneyland with your wife, right? Both of you, you have to consume food, drinks, and all of that, right?
Right.
Now, if you go by yourself, I'm losing that additional person, right? So I can't just give you like a single room at a cheaper price. No, I have to kind of make up for that lost revenue
Oh,
that I would have had.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So look it up. It's called a single supplement, right?
So being single is really like costing people. This is wow. I've never thought about it like that. This
Yeah.
is actually great. Now, but hear me out, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Now there are people they're single.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I now well because I'm thinking about people that you're single but you're dating. So like you go out with people. Um, is there like a type
Yeah.
of single person that's affected the most? Then I should say.
Okay, so I understand your question in two parts, right? So when you're single and you're dating, right, even that is there's an additional cost for you, right? Both men and women. Dating is more expensive when you're single than when you're in a couple,
Yeah, that
right?
does make sense. I did
Because
spend
think
more money
about
when I
all
was
of the
dating.
preparation, the
Yeah,
planning, and all of that. Exactly. Your grooming, your expenses on the
that makes
first
sense
date.
because
If you go
when
through
I
a lot of different first
yeah
dates.
when I was dating, I had to go and get a haircut every time. But now I just tell my wife, okay, we go into the restaurant. I don't wanna get no haircut.
Exactly, because
So
then
yeah.
when you're already in a relationship, you have that cooperation that's happening there, right? So you can sort of negotiate, on your budget
Hmm.
collectively, and then
Yeah,
you decide whatever to do. But when you're
that makes sense.
single, it's sort of two
You're trying to
separate
impress when you're
budgets that
single.
exactly. So
Yeah.
the main economic concept that um, I think drives this single stacks is what we call economies of scale.
Hmm.
So you might know it from businesses, but within the household there is economies of scale that results in cost savings. Now, when we
Hmm.
talk about who, okay, so the second part of me understanding that question, right? Who is more affected or who suffers the most, right? Is usually the people who are at a disadvantage in the society. So, not surprisingly, single parents,
Right.
right? And in particular, single mothers, right? And how does that disadvantage present itself? So, women, first of all, when we enter the marketplace, there's a gender pay gap. So already we start off at a lower income base on average than
Right.
men, right? Now, when you're a parent, you have additional costs. So if you're a single parent, you have to bear the full cost right? So you already have, as a single woman, you have a lower income base, and when you're a parent, you have a higher cost that you have to face, right? So single parents are usually the most affected. Single mothers, in particular, in Australia, for example, the that singles tax. Just talking about the expenses, the average minimum expenses that households face. That single tax for single parents are about 20% more than people who don't have children.
And
Right,
it,
so
it
it's
does
it's a lot.
it makes sense actually. I mean,
Hmm.
thinking about it, I mean, when you look at from an economic standpoint, even me, growing up in a single parent household, particularly a single mother household,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
cost that she had to incur to take care of me and my two other siblings
Yeah,
is definitely higher than somebody who was also single, but they didn't have any kids.
yeah,
So they didn't have to buy. So when my mom had to buy maybe 2 pounds of chicken, they could buy 1 pound and it will last them for maybe 2 days or something. That actually makes a lot of
yeah.
sense. And we don't generally think about it, period.
But let's think about, okay. Let's just compare two families that have children, right?
Mm-hmm,
So you have a single parent household and you have the traditional mother, father, and a child, right?
mm-hmm,
When you compare the single parent household, their costs are higher because at least when you're a couple, you can split those additional costs, right? So there's a child
mm-hmm,
in the home, let's say you have 20% more costs. When you're a single person, you bear that full 20%. When you have a husband or a partner, you can split that cost, right? So that's where the single, sorry, the single tax is well, where it manifests.
So, Alicia, the one thing
Hmm.
that I'm thinking about now is, so what happens in a family where only one person is working, like one person goes to work.
Hmm.
From a cost standpoint, how does that factor in with the singles and non-singles tax? Does that have a singles tax component to it, or are there other benefit to building a family but where only one person is working? Like, talk to me about that piece.
Okay. So you will say that, okay, so we're comparing two households, right? One with a couple where it's just a single earner household, right? So there's just one earner versus a single household with just one person, right? Let's say they earn the same amount of money,
Hmm.
right? So each household earns the same amount of money. Now, is there a single tax there? You're asking,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I would say yes, because consider the single person, right? They have to do both what we call market work, which is to go to work, earn an income, right? And they
Hmm.
also have to do all of the non-market work, which is the household work. So like the chores, the cooking, the cleaning, all of that. Okay. Now, the couple, there will be some sort of specialization that's happening in the couple that is not happening in the singles. So the single person has to do everything.
Right.
Whereas with the couples, you will have some sort of specialization. When I say specialization, what I mean is that the person who is working, they're doing the market work,
Hmm.
right? The person who's working a job. The person who is not working, they tend to do the non-market work, right?
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
even if we value, let's say we just value the non-market work at market value, if we were to pay a cleaner or something, right? That means that there's still a cost saving that's going on with the couple that's not happening with a single person,
Yeah,
because a
that
single
makes
person
sense.
has to do everything, right? And we're not even talking about the psychological load that's going on with that for the single person,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Okay,
So
that
yes,
makes
even
sense.
if there's a single earner, there is still that cost saving.
Okay, yeah. That
Mhm.
that that definitely makes sense. Thanks for clarifying
Yeah.
that. Right.
Now, I would say also, not just costs, right? Like actual tangible costs. When we think about the social cost of being single, in developed countries, it's not really that much of a a big cost, I would say, because there's been changing attitudes, I would say, around being single. But there are
Mhm.
some cultures where being single, especially if you're a woman, is a particular disadvantage, right? You're looked down upon, or you may face housing discrimination because maybe landlords might not want to rent to a single woman. There are still some cultures, okay? And older singles, especially women, again,
Mhm.
right? Because women are living longer,
Right. Yeah. True.
right? So that means that it's more likely that we will spend a larger chunk of our lives single than men in our old age, especially. So we're living longer, we earn less. So that means that whatever we have, whatever earnings we have, it has to pay for more for a longer period of time without any spousal safety net.
That. Yeah. That. I mean, as you're speaking about it, I'm literally experiencing it in my head because it's something that you see, that you experience on a daily basis, but you don't think about it.
Hmm.
And even I'm thinking back, just growing up, I'm looking at how that single stacks. So wow, I'm really glad, you're bringing this out, and you brought this out in your research, and I know this is just one small part of
Yeah,
your broader research, but
yeah,
this is,
yeah,
to me, this is a very important part, and I'm glad we're speaking about it. So here's my
yeah.
question to you now. What could change to prevent this? Do we have to change systems, or do people need to just hook up? Like, and I believe that. I mean, I feel like the system will have to change, but I don't know. You're the expert, so talk to me about that.
Well, first of all, I'm an economist first, right? So I don't give any advice with people's, their personal life or so on, right? I strongly believe in, autonomy. A person um, makes the decisions with whatever information they have to them,
Mm-hmm.
based on their environment, their experiences, and all of that. So as an economist, I would think about how people will make these decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And focus more on policy. So usually, policy sort of changes the environment in which people make decisions, right? So that's where I'm more leaning towards. So you identify certain systems that cause these disadvantages, right? So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, in your tax and your transfer system, right?
Right.
So actually, some countries they've started to move towards an individual tax system. Like, so, it's for in Australia, is your taxes are based on your individual income. I think it's the US that still have that option for joint filing. Um, but most countries they're moving towards that, right? I think the issue is that when it comes to welfare, they usually um, base welfare payments on household income, and that's
Right.
usually where the issue comes in. So um, I think there's some research which is sort of what is in my thesis too. um, like research into how to set those tax rates, so that you have some equity between different types of households, right?
Okay.
Another issue has to do with housing because um, at least in the developed countries, when we went through the first demographic transition, a lot of the housing stock was based on um, larger families, right? So more 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom housing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think now you're seeing a bit more housing targeted towards single people, right?
Right.
But still, there's a lot of work that can be done in that space. Um, the other aspects has more to do with culture, like, and that's very difficult to influence, and that's a topic that I don't like to to delve into much because I believe in autonomy, right? But there something that we've been seeing is that one of the reasons why these demographic shifts have been happening worldwide is because you have this diffusion of culture all over the world. So think about, for example, the U.S. culture, how it influenced us in the Caribbean growing up, like in terms of attitudes towards family
Yeah,
and all
yeah,
of that, right? So you see how that sort of cultural diffusion affects our decisions to be single and all of that. So I can't advocate for the opposite of that, but if there's a cultural shift towards more marriage, as long as they're
Mhm.
healthy marriages, then those are some of the things. Businesses, for example, um, there are actually some businesses that have started to take these trends at heart, right? So you see some subscription services, they do have a single package that it's not exactly half of the family package, but it's more competitively priced, right? Or even
Mhm.
some travel agencies, they start to cater to single people, to solo travel. But it's something that is slow. And I think businesses in particular, they won't really look at it unless, of course, it can increase their profit share or their
Yeah,
market share or something like that. Yeah, so again, more research into these things, and making a case for why single people should be basically catered for, right? And
yeah.
something that's also not lost upon me is that does society actually want to cater to single people?
Oh,
Like
interesting.
that's a question that I've been discussing with my colleagues. Like, is it healthy for society to have such a large percentage of single people? Especially with the decline in fertility rate and so on. So there's this conflict there because individual decisions, individuals, we make our decision based on our information, but then is that a socially is that a social optimum in the long run?
Yeah, and that sounds like a whole different area of research.
Yeah,
That complements the whole single
yeah.
stacks. Uh, so here's the thing though. We speak about the cost of being single, and
Hmm.
I mean not just the financial cost, but the social cost and other areas. So for example, in my head now I'm thinking about there's also a time cost. For instance, if you have to pick up the kids from school and you have nobody, then you might be have to leave work early. So you lose that day pay. You lose it. Like so, I'm so
Hmm.
as you're talking, I'm
Hmm.
starting to see a whole bunch of other costs that um could be factored in here.
Yeah.
So my thing to you is: are there any benefits, financial benefits or otherwise, of being single?
So I'm just going to go back one step, right? As you mentioned that in our previous question, you asked me, is there anything that can be done, right?
Hmm.
And what you just mentioned, there's a policy, even in Canada, that's based on that time cost, parental leave, right?
Yeah.
Right. So parental leave basically acknowledges that, okay, there's a time in addition to your um, cost, your expenses, your monetary cost of having a child. There's also a time cost to having a child, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to subsidize that time cost by giving you parental leave, right? So that's the economic basis of it, right? And um, if you're a single person, right, what does that parental leave look like compared to a couple, right?
Hmm.
So I think in some countries when parental leave was just implemented, it was only for one person,
Yeah.
but
Only
then
for the
slowly,
mother.
there's both mother and father,
Yeah, in Canada now
right?
there's parental leave for both
Exactly,
a husband and wife, mother and father.
exactly, right? But what you're saying about is there a benefit to being single? Of course, there are benefits to being single. Um, well, it has more to do with autonomy, so you have more control over your finances, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't inherit debt, which is another big issue, especially in the United States, of being in a couple, right? You have more mobility when it comes to your career and your education, and especially when you're young, that's a very big thing because it influences your long term career trajectory and your
Yeah.
earnings that you can have over your lifetime. You know, some people would say less relationship financial stress, but of course that depends on the person that you choose.
Yeah.
Um, right. Um, we would say that okay, when you're single, you don't have these divorce costs and all of that. But again, that depends on the person that you choose, right? So
Exactly,
of
because I
course,
mean, you don't want to factor in the divorce costs as a reason why not to like maybe do something, get married, do something, because you're not
yeah,
getting into a partnership with somebody for that. That's just an unfortunate outcome when something happens. But
yeah,
so
yes. Mhm.
no, so that is. I mean, initially when we spoke and you spoke about the singles cost and I saw the article that you wrote.
Mhm.
Um, I started thinking about it, but now that you're speaking, I'm seeing more like in my head now. I'm thinking there are so much things that we take for granted that if somebody like yourself don't step forward and present us with like sometimes research or evidence based arguments about certain things, we will still
Mhm.
take it for granted. So I'm so happy that you are here and we're talking about this. So
Mhm.
Alicia, before you know what? I need to stop saying Alicia. Dr. Bob.
That's okay. Go
Before
on, Elizabeth.
before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to add? I know this is just one small area of your research. Is there,
Mhm.
if you can just give a general synopsis of like your broader research areas before we wrap
Oh,
up?
yes, definitely. Right. So in my thesis, right, I look more at how to design tax systems, but around families, right, which is something
Mm-hmm.
that's often neglected in the literature. So, like, how do you tax couples, or how do you tax families with children? How do you design welfare systems for families with children? And we might think it's trivial, but it's not, because some economic facts are that people respond differently to tax policies, right? Like when I say respond, I mean if like my decision to work or my decision to not work, my decision to have children, like my decision to move, these decisions they affect people differently depending on the families that they reside in. So
Mm-hmm.
that was basically the crux of my research, and that's where the single stacks basically that's where that article came from, which is just like a little piece of um of my research. Right now, I'm researching broader topics, so I'm looking more at fertility, right? So, if you know, there's a declining fertility trend it's a global trend, not just in developed countries, but also developing countries, even our Caribbean countries, like
Mm-hmm.
the average number of children that one woman has, it's dropped significantly between our parents' generation and us, and that has a lot of implications for our society going forward. Like our tax systems, our social systems, everything. So I'm looking at whether fiscal policies, whether they've been effective in reversing these trends or at least affecting these trends, which types of
Mhm.
policies are effective. And I'm also looking at disadvantaged communities. When I say disadvantaged, I mean, so for example, single mothers or maybe people who are experiencing homelessness, right? Looking to see how, fiscal policies or just social policies can help them. So those are my two broad research areas. And of course, I'm a Caribbean economist, so I always have a spot, a soft spot
Of
for
course.
my country. So um, I'm also looking into some topics regarding development.
Mhm.
And when I say that, I mean around sorry, entrepreneurship, women in entrepreneurship in developing countries, looking to see what are some of the things that influence women's decision to be maybe managers or role models, yeah, that sort of thing. And what I would say, Kimron, is that um, as economists, we a very important aspect of our work depends on data,
Yeah.
and it's like outside looking in, you realize, oh, we could make so many decisions, or we can make much better decisions in terms of policy if we had more data. So I'm very happy that there's a push now for evidence-based decision making in the Caribbean that is being supported.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Slowly, slowly new data is coming on board, and that allows people like myself to do a lot more research and contribute, um, to our countries, our home countries. Yeah,
Awesome. Awesome. Great. That
yeah.
you're doing great work. Kudos. Congratulations. Super
Thank
proud.
you.
You're my claim to fame. I can now say my friend is has a PhD. Uh, great work. Thank you for coming on and talking about the single stacks, the cost of being single, things that we generally don't think about. So
Mhm.
thank you for coming on and talking about that today. Bars Nation, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dropping Bars podcast. This is your special Valentine's Day episode. We were talking with Dr. Alicia Bubb, an economist extraordinaire. Um,
Hi.
don't forget, Mars Nation, to like, subscribe, and share this podcast wherever you're consuming it on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whether you're on YouTube. Like, comment, share the episode, share this discussion, and Alicia, if people want to reach out to you to maybe find out some more information about your research or what you're doing, or more about the single stacks, or maybe somebody might want to reach out for a follow-up interview, how can they get in contact with you?
Okay, so the best way to get in contact with me is via email, right? So my email alicia.bubb@gmail.com, or you can contact me through my LinkedIn. Um, So you can just search for my name, Alicia Bubb, or my LinkedIn is Alicia-Bubb. Um, I don't really have social media right now for those purposes. So those are the two best ways to contact me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
And Bars Nation, peace out, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you. We're out.